DevOps Iterations.
And so here we are. This is a very special iteration of Abnormal DevOps Iterations because we have here Tim Meusel, David Sandilands, and Ben Ford, and we are going to talk about Puppet, the present, the future, what's happening, and I guess we have the best people we can have to talk about these topics. But I would say let's go with introductions. Tim, 2 words about you and Puppet.
Yes. Hi, everybody. I'm Tim. I'm from Germany and in the Puppet ecosystem since a decade, roughly. And since 7 to 8 years, I'm very active in the open source community around Puppet. And I got elected multiple times into the project management committee. And I'm trying to lead a bit the directions of Vox Pupuli, the Puppet community.
Good. I would say the column of Vox Pupuli. David?
I'm David Sandilands. I'm based in Scotland. My current role is the community and dev relations lead at Puppet. I've been involved with Puppet since about 2012 when I first started working in Puppet. And I've kind of been between banks and media companies implementing Puppet, and then I've been at Puppet itself for the past 4 years.
Cool. And last but not least, Ben.
Hey, y'all. Ben here, Ben for 2K. 13 years at Puppet, employed at Puppet, I think. Something like that. I've been around a while, did professional services, built the education department, did a community product, some other things. I've been involved with the Puppet community for a very long time, and probably most of you recognize my handle from my interactions there. I've been working behind the scenes with Vox for a very long time, and don't let Tim's like demureness there put you off. Tim is kind of like the heart and soul of Vox, so we should really be giving Tim a lot more props than we do. Yeah, that's me. Also, I have to say, Alessandro, I really like the name of the show because it makes me laugh every time, because it implies that there is something normal somewhere about DevOps, and I'm just not sure that that's possible.
Okay, I guess that's a compliment. I hope so. So I would say anybody who is dealing with Puppet in these days is wondering and asking himself or herself, what's happening? Anyone wants to tell us what's happening in the Puppet world?
That depends on how far you want to go back. Like where do we want to set this space? I think what we're talking about today is kind of rooted in the acquisition and like the changes in the company that come from private equity, but there were problems before that too. So it's not just that.
Yeah, I guess I would kind of view it from my point of view. I think the open source model for Puppet was kind of adopted as a big growth strategy, right? And I've spoken to people like Nigel Carson about this before, and that warning of most open source companies never actually had a final strategy for what happens when they matured with their open source. It was all about growth, just getting as many people using the product as possible. And I think what we saw as Puppet kind of reached a relative maturity in the language and the infrastructure, that the kind of priorities of community and enterprise, diverged somewhat, and there wasn't the kind of same sort of resources, to happily put around. And so that kind of stewardship that Puppet and then Perforce had provided over the time was feeling kind of more prioritized on the business side, and wasn't kind of providing, the focus the community would like on things. And I know, we certainly talked about, how Debian was so badly, delayed in terms of agent release there. But there's other things like that in terms of what was really being prioritized coming through, and that kind of challenge of balancing that, right, of
Yep.
Puppet and Perforce's businesses try to work out how they invest and how they kind of make themselves sustainable with revenue and all that sort of thing, but also the kind of needs of the community when it was set like that with Puppet stroke Perforce's steward.
I think kind of in short, like you could say that a lot of companies, Puppet included, is like they look at open source and they see that as a really, really fast way to go to market. And it is. It's like you use open source and you get stuff built much faster. You get a better product faster. You get out there in the market faster. But then when you get to be more mature, you don't you don't see those same kind of rapid returns. And so they sort of lose track of the fact that the foundations of their companies is built on that. And it's like, sometimes it's hard to just keep going and to just understand that is a foundational part of what makes your company successful, and that's you get stagnation because of that.
And I think one of the God, I was just going to say one of the things as well to take into mind was, one of the ways Perforce does its acquisitions is 2 years in, it sort of reviews how the acquisition's gone and how the company bought is running. And I think there was a recognition that there was a kind of long-term issue in terms of how things were being prioritized for the community, and just in terms of did it make sense for us to keep stewarding the way we were, which was why we looked at that, to make that change of us trying to look to kind of give the community well, obviously it's not give, right, because all that code's under Apache and has plenty of contributions, but basically look to try and change it to a partnership relationship in terms of us working together in the ecosystem, as opposed to us being the kind of gatekeepers, having ultimate say on priorities and ultimate say on, agent releases and things like that.
I think, Ben, you mentioned that open source is often the foundation of a company. It's like sometimes, like Perforce, you're building a product based on open source, but sometimes you're just using open source tools from others, and they're still the foundation of your own company. And the issue is that it's very hard to put numbers on open source. It's very hard to measure the success of your own open source tools. And it's very hard to argue to management people to get more people to work on an open source project when you just cannot estimate the benefit for the company. And that makes it really hard for open source to survive on the long-term trip, I think.
Kind of a tangent on that. I wish that we didn't have such an adverse reaction to ethical telemetry. I did try to push together a telemetry program at Puppet, and that was one of the real reasons, is I wanted to be able to demonstrate the size of the open source market and how many people were using it and how many people were contributing back, and it just didn't go very far.
So if you let me ask, because there is an elephant in the room here, which started with probably the decision from Perforce to not release anymore the packages to the public, at least to the openly, and only to customers. And then from here, the decision of the community to create a fork. Can we talk about this? Because I guess that's the thing which is more important for the people around.
Yeah, I think there's two different things there that you brought up, and maybe I'm wrong, but what I heard is the unpackaging or the stopping packaging of public packages, but then also the stopping development of the open source project, and pulling it internal. Are those the two things you wanted to talk about?
Yes, I'm not sure if the point was the decision was to stop development of the open source product, but maybe to have a sort of
Sorry, stop public development. Maybe is a better way of saying it.
Okay. Anyway, yeah, let's talk about this. Let's see what is, first of all, what happened, just to give a quick summary for who doesn't know the background, and then let's spend 2 words on what is going to happen in the future. Maybe, David, you want to summarize a bit?
I think it's probably easiest if I start and Ben and Tim keep me honest here. And because of course there's a different interpretation view on things as well that can, depending on where you're standing as things happen. So I think the intention of what Perforce was aiming to do was to pull in the packages into a EULA secured area whereby there is, we have Puppet Enterprise and Puppet Enterprise Advanced unchanged. There is a new product going to be called Puppet Core coming out, which essentially is the core packages in a EULA signed area with up to 25 nodes free, and access by signing the EULA to developers, to be able to access those kind of 6 weekly builds. We then look to ask community to continue to develop in the open source repos, and basically look to kind of give, I'll say enhanced trusted contributor, since trusted contributor was probably the closest thing to what we're describing, but was looking to kind of give full admin rights to the community to run in the Puppet Labs areas of those public repos where they were, while Puppet Core and Puppet Enterprise would be based off repos that had been privately taken off. And we would look to kind of work with community to contribute into those repos, into the public repos for certain, up to a certain level of vulnerability, and potentially other items. At that point, I think there was a feeling from community that really didn't give an autonomy, because ultimately, the Puppet Labs namespace was owned by Perforce. And whatever admin rights we could give, that kind of left it in a position where it was still it was Perforce owning it and community essentially working it. So we kind of got to a position where the community was looking to have its own organizational namespace. And that's kind of when we kind of tripped into trademark issues, and I learned a lot more about trademarks than I ever wanted to know. But the simple version of it is, when you have a trademark like Puppet or Bolt, it's not as simple as us being able to just transfer the repos, because in some way that implies we're sort of authorizing a third party to produce Puppet and produce something called Puppet. But what kind of we came over to agreeing over a bit of time and working out from precedents like MariaDB is that you can say under the Apache license that functional uses of trademark names like Puppet and Bolt and other things, and uses in libraries and file directories, things that are purely for function rather than sort of product naming or marketing naming, are absolutely fine and can be kept. So that kind of led to the point of the rename to OpenVox, and having that position where the OpenVox project would not have to rename binaries and libraries and so on, and they could continue as is for the present. And that would kind of be our agreement as to how to make sure the modules and the development tools and the ecosystem could continue to work together across those two products.
Yeah, that's a very sage decision. So just to clarify, the OpenVox fork will have still a command line called Puppet. The directory is called etc Puppet Labs. I don't know.
Yeah. For the time being, that's what we're doing. Over time, like as a careful transition, we're going to move to a different name, but we'll ship compatibility symlinks. So that's basically the same thing that MariaDB did. It's like if you install MariaDB today, like they have their own full suite of command line tools, MariaDB this, MariaDB that, but you can also run MySQL admin, just like you did a decade ago, and that's just a symlink to the new tool. We're doing this because we don't want to cause breakage in the community. We want to give them time and space to like transition with us, and we want to make it possible so that modules that like for example Puppet Agent module manages PuppetConf, and we don't want to make it choose between this one or that one, and we want to give it space so that it can either you manage through the symlink or do a conditional or something like that, but not break it immediately. So today, if you install OpenVox, you get Puppet command line tools. Very soon, we're going to add OpenVox command line tools, and then over the next year, we'll kind of transition from one to the other. So you'll run Vox apply instead of Puppet apply, for example.
Okay, so that's the mid-long-term approach.
Yeah.
Okay, and what about the code base? No, I mean, and the compatibility, let's say the language, we will risk to have when in the future code which can work only on Puppet or in Vox.
We're really trying to avoid that. And honestly, I think this is one of the, I did a blog post about it, about why I think that a good fork is actually really beneficial for the community. Because one of the things that came out of this is one of the, I don't recall what his title is right now, but one of the people in product, the VP of product for Puppet, Svika, suggested that we do a language steering committee. And so we're running with that idea. We're building a steering committee that is going to have representatives from across the community, including us, including Perforce, and we'll build like the reference spec for the language, and then we just implement that. So as long as we keep to the spec, the tools will be interoperable.
Right. Yeah. Tim, I guess for Vox Populi now there is a lot more work to do. So, how do you think this is going to be handled? Also, I mean, developing modus and Puppet, something in Puppet language is one thing. Developing Ruby code for Puppet or closure. I mean, there is not only Puppet itself. No, there is PuppetDB. There is Bolt. What do you think is going to happen under this perspective? And
so a bit of background about Vox Pupuli. We have around 200 Puppet modules on the Forge that are maintained by us. But it's not just the modules at the moment. We own a huge amount of the tooling ecosystem within Puppet. A dozen to 20 Puppet lint plugins, for example, that are not only used by Vox Pupuli, but are also vendored by the PDK, and also used in the Puppet DevTools container, which in turn is used by CD4PE for big PE companies to validate their code. And those Puppet lint plugins are already written in Ruby. And we have many more tools that we already maintain, like the metadata JSON linter, which validates the metadata.json file for various keywords. And Puppet syntax is also maintained by Vox Pupuli. So we have a bit of a background for maintaining different tools and also stuff that's written in Ruby. And the community is growing on a healthy base, I would say. So we get new contributors basically every month. And their idea of Vox Pupuli is not that we exclusively write all the code, but that we provide a foundation for other contributors to also work within the community. And I think that's working quite good. And I think the fork is just the next level for Vox Pupuli. We are already quite good at maintaining a healthy community and a working ecosystem. And now we are also maintaining the Puppet agent and server and the Puppet DB. And I think that's going to work out good.
I will add a little bit to that. As you know, I did community at Puppet for a very long time, and so I'm very familiar with like the community and with running metrics and stats about how the community engages, and that includes contributions. And there, obviously, the large majority of contributions to Core Puppet did indeed come from the Core Puppet team, but a surprising number of contributions came from outside, mostly from Vox people. So Tim, for example, is in our list of top contributors, even though he never actually worked for the company, and a significant number of those did come to Puppet. Some of our major features even were added by community members. Like one of my favorites is like the file resource can actually pull content from HTTP like web servers, and that came out of the blue from a community member who said, "Hey, I needed this. Here's this feature that I built for you." And I think that those things are still going to happen going forward. I will be honest, I am a little bit nervous about Clojure because Clojure is a very niche language and not a lot of people know it. So anybody listening who knows Clojure and is interested in Clojure, JRuby, Puppet, we would love to talk with you. So
yeah, so
open call for anybody to participate.
I wonder, so it's not only about Puppet at this point. Will be the fork also Factor, Puppet Server, Puppet DB, Bolt? What about those other tools, which are somehow separated software? They are all going to be forked?
I think we're going to take them on an as-needed basis. The things that we need to fork, we will fork, and then we'll just kind of see how it goes. And we don't want to take on more than we need to. I think David mentioned that PDK was going to remain open, and so we're happy for Perforce to continue building that, including all the content that Vox generates, all the tools that go into the PDK that come from Vox. So we're not going to try to take anything from Perforce, but anything that we have to pick up, we will. We are also trying to simplify the ecosystem a little bit. There's tools that probably could be combined with other tools, and so we're not just going to keep maintaining a thing just because it exists.
Yeah, and for me as well, that's something we want to be very clear on, is that that ecosystem area, when you're looking at modules and you're looking at development tools, that is an area we want this partnership to be very tight on. We'd had conversations in the past about in terms of the development tools we have, pretty much every Puppet user ends up with a kind of mix of Vox and Puppet development tools, and working out where we have some duplication. I don't even want to start talking about Beaker and Litmus right now, but we all know there's tools which definitely have duplication, and there's also just general ways of working where we've talked about this over the years, where we could simplify how we're generating modules and how we're automating testing pipelines and things like that. So that to me is what's kind of exciting about what we'll be doing next, in terms of working together on the language spec, but also working together on these tools and working out how we simplify things, how we automate. And I think both sides working on what's priority to them, while ensuring the language specifications are enabled.
Okay, sorry. From let's say a relatively external point of view, I always thought, and I still think also in this case, that a fork is never something which makes things better. Is some kind of dispersion of resources. I guess, given the conditions, is probably the best thing which could be done. But what do you think? Do we risk to lose something in terms of cohesive ecosystem and the product itself?
I feel like forks got a very negative connotation. I feel like a fork was the necessary vehicle to basically to end Perforce and Puppet before it being that kind of steward and gatekeeper. And that's the kind of mechanism we've used so that Perforce and Puppet isn't making all the shots, and we're freeing up our engineers in terms of people that we used to have spending a lot of time essentially gatekeeping things that the community could quite frankly have done themselves and didn't need to wait for us and didn't need our input from. I think I would view it as the exact opposite, is that once we've obviously got over the initial starting point, which will obviously be a learning curve and for OpenVox and for ourselves in terms of kind of going out on a new EULA release, I think then both sides will have kind of more resources to focus on the things that kind of matter, directly to community and directly to kind of Perforce's customers.
I think kind of, I don't know, speaking really, really bluntly here, the changes that Perforce made, I'm cutting right to the chase, and I think that they would have ended up ending the community, because community members don't want to engage with a ULID project. The fact that they were no longer allowed to use Puppet on 26 or more nodes, things like that, those would have killed the interest of a lot of people who would otherwise have participated. And that would have a very chilling effect on community. So that said, I understand the business reasons why Perforce is doing that and why they have limited resources to spend. And so from their perspective, that's what they had to do, right? But from our perspective, without the fork, the community wouldn't continue to exist. And so when we ask if it's going to have a negative effect or if it's going to like lose some people or whatnot, yeah, it might. That's kind of what major changes do in a community. But it's also going to keep that many more people in the community. It's going to keep the community alive that much more. And so I think that we're going to see. I think that we're going to see more people participating. We're going to see a rebound, but most importantly, it's going to continue. The community is going to continue. We are going to have an open source project here. We are going to have people participating, building Puppet modules, sharing them on the Forge, and the ecosystem that we all know and love and trust is going to continue.
Yeah, that's convincing, honestly. Yeah. Told Ben. That's the point. Modules will be kept on the Forge. The Forge will stay as it is, as a central and unique repository of Puppet modules besides the GitHub. That's okay.
So I think it's one of these things with the language steering committee. Is probably to be clear, is like it's almost. Maybe language steering committee is not quite the right title in some ways, because it's probably a wider prerogative than that, because there'll be things like
we're calling, for what it's worth, David, what we're building, we're calling the standard steering community.
Yeah.
Because I agree with you entirely that it's bigger than just the language.
Yeah, because initial things are going to be like the manifest file for modules, right? Right now, you put which version of Puppet are you compatible with? Well, immediately as the first versions of Puppet Core come out and the first versions of OpenVox are out, you're immediately going to have semantic versions, that are different. So people are going to want to know, once we have that testing process to find what versions of OpenVox and what versions of Puppet Enterprise does this work with. So there's kind of specification updates needed there. And there's been things that we want to do for a while in terms of things like updating the Puppet file specification and generally just general things in that area to kind of have things better written down. and even things like when you look at docs and things like that, the kind of open source documentation that stands today, we'll have to kind of decide, how do we kind of redirect that? Puppet will have Puppet core documentation, and it's those kind of things which are all going to have to be worked out in partnership and discussed through to kind of give the best experience for both for enterprise customers and for community.
That is an interesting point too. I hadn't really thought that all the way through, but now that you say it, I almost think that the docs, like the core docs of like this is how Puppet works, this is how the language works, etc. I almost think that they should be maintained by the steering committee, and then we sort of subscribe to it. Like we use that docs, you use that docs, but the steering committee is the one that actually generates that. But that's for like way down the road for us to figure out. Not today. I do have one question though. Well, we've been talking about this a little bit because we already have an 8.11 and we're about to release an 8.12 very soon. Is Perforce going to stick to Semver? I know that Puppet over its history has had a kind of a loose relationship with Semver. We've tried and it has. I see Tim kind of smiling a little bit. He can verify that we've not always been really good at keeping breaking changes to the proper releases.
Absolutely.
I mean, my understanding is yes. I don't want to say that since I don't want to absolutely commit to that since I'm not from the engineering side. But I don't have any information to say we were doing otherwise. And I sort of laugh as well because I can remember being a customer and changing from versioning to the current date format, and it was something that nobody wanted to talk about.
Do you expect in the future some code base contamination, or maybe also an attempt to try to keep it as much as similar as possible? So commits from Perforce to the open source code base, if you can call that, and vice versa, or we can expect that from the.
I mean, honestly, as long as the licenses are compatible, I don't see any problem with them cherry picking from our code base or something like that. I feel like that's how open source works.
Yeah.
And I think it's something I want to kind of push from my role is very much what Tim highlighted earlier is a lot of open source things are used, and it'd be good for us to kind of regularly report on what's used, and not just what Vox is producing, but other open source projects, because it's a problem in the industry to kind of not be recognizing exactly what's used, and also kind of highlighting where we are contributing, but equally where we are taking. So I don't have an exact format on how that should be, but that's something that I've raised and has a lot of support internally. Is that would kind of help us all understand, right? Is everyone putting in their fair dues, right? Because that's always going to be a challenge between enterprise and open source. Is the enterprise just harvesting here, or is it really an open source project? Is the enterprise just propping up? I mean, I think the latter is less likely in general from what we've seen in the industry, but I think having something transparent that makes it very clear, are things being cherry picked, but also very clear as to what other projects are being used and kind of deserve support and contributions.
I think now would be a really good time for Tim to chime in and talk about how long he's been trying to convince the company that an upstream project would be a good idea.
I had it in the back of my mind for way too long. So a rough explanation in the Foreman ecosystem, we have Foreman as an open source tool, and their community and Vox Pupuli are closely related because they both use Puppet to configure things. So we help them and they help us. And different companies sponsor people to work on Foreman. And Red Hat probably pays the majority of the developers. And Red Hat has an internal or a commercial tool called Satellite, which is basically Foreman just one minor version behind with different colors and on-call support if you want to pay for it. And 5-6 years ago, we talked already with the Foreman people and thought, hey, why don't we do the same with Puppet? Why isn't the Puppet agent, Puppet server, PuppetDB source code owned by Vox Pupuli as an upstream organization, and different companies sponsor the development of this code base? And if someone wants to make a commercial product, let's call it Puppet Enterprise, they could just do this as a downstream product. And we pitched the idea multiple times to Puppet employees back then and now to Perforce. And this, I know from some engineering people that they liked the idea, but somehow management wasn't convinced that this is a good way forward, which is really sad. So they never really discussed this in person with us. So I don't know why the Perforce management didn't like the idea. I would have loved to just hear their thoughts on it. I still think this would have been the best way forward instead of a fork.
Yes.
But now that Perforce announced those changes back in the end of last year, I think the fork was the only way forward for the community. We had no other option.
Yep.
Okay.
But with any luck, maybe by this time next year, we'll be having a different conversation, and maybe that is what we'll evolve into. I still, kind of hold out hope for that ideal there.
Absolutely, yes.
So let's talk about timelines for the Puppet Enterprise product line and from the OpenVox product. Let's. What can we expect in the next months and then years? Also, you mentioned this core Puppet Enterprise thing. So let's summarize a bit what is happening in the next months in terms of releases and everything.
Are you allowed to say anything?
I am. This is obviously kind of pre-release in a sense, so I don't have exact details, but what we should expect is the kind of first EULA signed releases out, next month, God willing. And the Puppet core, which I'm describing there, is essentially, if you think of the core package today, Puppet, PuppetDB, Bolt, and so on, it is those packages in something at a different price point to Puppet Enterprise, designed so that you can essentially pay Perforce for, fully tested, secured packages, and kind of not have to kind of go all the way to Puppet Enterprise. And the anticipation is for Puppet cores is we'll have a 6-week build cycle. And as I kind of highlighted there, that, developers who, sign the EULA will be able to have access to that build. And, that Puppet core will ultimately feed into, because ultimately fixes would first go to Puppet Enterprise and then to Puppet core. So kind of changing where we currently see things, which is typically...
It's kind of backwards of how we used to do it.
Yeah. So, I mean, the aim was looking to kind of get fixes to Puppet Enterprise as soon as possible, to avoid the kind of delay we've historically seen to getting to Puppet Enterprise.
So just to understand, the Puppet core will have the web interface of Puppet Enterprise, or it will be just the...
So Puppet core would feel a lot more like what open source Puppet, felt like before the change.
Okay. And it will have a 25 nodes limit? Or
That's right, yeah. 25. So Puppet Enterprise is not changing in its permission. So PE is still the kind of 10 nodes, whereas Puppet core would be 25.
Jump
What
from infinite.
It's not too much, honestly. That's as a user point of view. Sorry if I say that report, it's my fault. But yeah, anyway, okay, that's a business decision. Okay, and then for the open source of fork, what we can expect in terms of releases and everything in the next months?
You won't be surprised to know that most of what we're going to be doing over the next month is still kind of organizational. We have you've probably seen some of the pipeline work where now instead of taking like a very long time for different parts and different things to get updated and like an internal build farm to be updated and like all the other things, we can now basically add a platform, update a platform, push a build out very quickly. And that's one of the things that we're focusing on. The next step beyond that is getting tests fully running. So right now we're because we're basically the same as the original Puppet source, we're not so worried about the fact that we're not testing right now because we're not making substantial changes. But as soon as we do, we need to have a test pipeline that does all of the acceptance and all the unit and an integration test and everything so that we can put out fully tested builds. That's what we're doing from the technical perspective over the next probably, I mean, those projects don't sound big, but they probably will end up rolling over just because things expand. So let's say 2 to 3 months. Then the debrand, which is basically changing all the names of everything, that's going to be an ongoing project. We've already got a significant amount of it done for Puppet itself, but we still have to go through PuppetDB, Puppet Server, etc., and get those debranded so they say OpenVox instead of Puppet, and executing on that plan. And then we have organizational things like finishing out like the governance for it, figuring out how we're going to plan a roadmap, who's going to sort of like prioritize, make decisions, and building a security team. So we have right now somebody who is taking lead, taking point on building that security team out so that we can do quick response. We're getting registered as I forget what they call it, the CV number provider issuer something, so that we can do our own security response. And we're working with Perforce security team to try to get like back channel communication so that we can share information when we get our own security team up and going. And then Tim can probably talk about like what Vox is doing for like expanding the management and organizational structure of Vox to be able to support such a major change.
Yes. So we got messages from different companies that are already using Puppet in open source or Puppet Enterprise, and they are interested in supporting us. Some of those companies want to make a one-time donation, like Microsoft did out of nowhere last year, of around like $8,000 to Vox Pupuli. Some other companies want to sponsor us on a monthly basis, and again, there are other companies that have some engineers and they want to donate some of their development time or some of their engineering time to Vox Pupuli. So what we are currently doing is a lot of discussions and organizing things. Like, we get money now, that's great, but how do we spend it? And what's the best way to spend the money? Like, I love chocolate, but it doesn't make sense to buy just chocolate for 12,000 euros. So there are better ways
for
to spend
config management camp.
Maybe we have some. I don't want to spoil you too much. But yes, so we're figuring out like simple stuff like CI costs. Do we want to pay GitHub more money for CI runners? Do we get some CI runners sponsored? Do we rent physical servers from internet service providers? Or are there third-party companies that can provide resources for us? And yes, that's what we are currently doing. It's a lot of organization stuff. we are doing this in the project management committee since 6 years or something. That's the time when the PMC was founded. And now it's just getting a tiny bit more work because Vox Pupuli as a whole gets more attention from on the outside, which I think is great. So yeah, we are discussing the best way to grow Vox Pupuli, basically.
Yeah. And I mentioned config management camp. If you happen to be in Ghent in Belgium for FOSDEM and config management camp, we'll be doing a lot of conversations about the organizational structures. So if you're interested in participating, make sure to show up and chat with us. Also, I realize, Alessandro, I apologize. I only answered half your question. I forgot to talk about more long-term things because I'm so focused on like, what do we do now? How do we get going right now? But over the next year, you're going to see one is the bigger debranding thing where we have our own command line tool set and things like that. But also, let's admit it, Puppet is a very old kind of like crusty code base as happens to old code bases, and there's been a lot of things that sort of things that got added because of business reasons, and then things that didn't get finished because of business reasons, etc. And so we're going to be taking a look at some of those things and working on trying to simplify as much as we can, trying to sort of like simplify how the tool works while retaining all the things that people need and extending like working on finishing some of these features. Like some examples of those would be you remember at Puppet 6, we did deferred functions, where you can take a function, like functions normally run during compilation on the server, and we built a mechanism so that those can be deferred so that they run on the agent during the runtime. But in my opinion, it never really got finished because the number one reason for doing a deferred function is to like reach out to like Vault or something like that and resolve something at runtime, and then take that thing and put it into a configuration file. And that functionality just never got built. So right now, if you want to build a configuration file using a template, using information that's resolved at runtime, you actually have to, like, as an author, you have to understand this whole process of how that's working. You have to defer the resolution of the information, like that secret you pulled from Vox or something, and then you also have to figure out how to defer the compilation of the template, so that you can defer the template and along with that information. And it's really not that straightforward. So things like that, little paper cuts that are like 80-90% of the way there, we're going to take that and finish it out, so that if you say, here's a template that I want on this agent, it's going to use a secret that came from a Vault server. Puppet will just do it for you, and you won't have to know how to do all of that. You won't have to think about the fact that you're resolving things in different places. It'll just figure it out. Things like that, things like, I don't know, the sensitive and secret types that are a lot more difficult to use than they should. We'll kind of finish those implementations so that they get to be easier to use. Those are things that we're going to have to work with the standard steering committee so that they stay standard across the ecosystem. Because if we add that ability and then Puppet doesn't, then that makes an immediate divergence. So we have to make sure that we like pull that standards committee along and finish these sorts of things. We've got a whole bunch of like, there's a bunch of paper cuts that have existed in the code base, and we're just going to like start cleaning some of those up and just like letting people fix things, right?
Cool.
I mean, that's what open source is. It's like, hey, you have a problem, you have a thing that is annoying you. Here, go fix it.
No, that's fine. I mean, that's also good news because I don't know if I can say that, but I feel like Puppet over the years has been a bit losing ground, no?
Losing momentum.
Momentum, yes. For let's say technological reasons, because cloud native. In a cloud native landscape, the need of a tool like Puppet is less common. But I always say, as long as there are machines to manage, which have a lifetime of more than a few weeks, you need a tool like Puppet. And Puppet is still the best.
I would actually, I somewhat disagree with that just a little bit. I think that the need for a big tool like what Puppet does isn't as important in the cloud native world, but like the core engine, like the things that Puppet can do, those are absolutely still relevant. We just need to take that and figure out how to take that core functionality and turn it into something that you can use in the cloud native world. Mm-hmm. It's just the whole big infrastructure thing that is doesn't apply as much. But we have so much technology that you can reuse. Yeah,
I was probably also guilty not talking about the long term, because I feel like that's the one thing for both projects here is we sort of spent a lot of time of the community working out how do they get through to us to kind of drive priorities, and us, struggling to kind of manage that gatekeeping well, right? To have it as a politically polite phrase, right? And that did hurt momentum. And I think as this happens now, it frees up the community, and it also frees up Perforce engineers in terms of not kind of going through those processes, not doing those nightly builds, not kind of doing those PRs where Tim's the most expert man on the field, but yet he's having to wait for one of our engineers to tell him it's okay for it to go ahead, right? Which isn't benefiting Perforce, and it's not benefiting the community. So I think that just kind of frees up both sides, to absolutely work together on the language specification for the good of everyone, but to have those engineers, with the autonomy and the freedom to kind of, get going and get implementing. And I couldn't agree more with Ben. Is like I feel looking at a lot of the cloud native stuff and speaking to a lot of people, it feels very messy. It feels almost like that started up as a thing. It almost feels a bit like when I was a Unix admin and how messy Unix was before Puppet.
It's like back in the day when we did configuration management with shell scripts and sed and stuff like that, right?
Yes. Yeah, because when you kind of see how Kubernetes and containers and even serverless is managed, it does feel pretty scrappy, right? So it doesn't feel like it's solidly managed. Yeah. It just feels like that's the way these tools are often born. They're often born focusing on getting that initial technology going and doing it in a simple way, and then of course it scales out and then it becomes hard to manage, right? So I completely agree. And that's what I'm most hopeful about, is we're freeing up ourselves of, instead of being in this frustration and, dare I say, and antagonizing each other, we're moving to a position where we work in partnership, and we work on what we need to work on.
Yeah. So if you had to, how do you see Puppet? Sorry, Tim, go ahead.
So if I would have to describe Puppet in an abstract way, I would say that it builds a directed graph of resources and tries to apply it and enforce a state. No, Puppet has a focus on a single machine and tries to enforce the state on a single server. You might have PuppetDB and exchange information, blah, blah, blah. But the same abstract definition is valid for any cloud environment. Like, I might not have like 15 services on a Unix box that I would have to manage, but I have 15 different containers that I have to start somewhere. And before I start those, I have to allocate an IP address somewhere and open some firewall ports and maybe announce some routes via BGP. So the same core principles that we have in Puppet are still valid in any cloud native environment, I think. And there were some ideas in the past, like the Lyra or Lyra approach that Puppet had some years ago, to bring this as a workflow engine to the cloud. And I think this idea or this approach still has a lot of benefits, and it would make sense to combine this with containers in a cloud platform.
Better too.
Okay, I hope so. So I will have a work in 10 years, I guess.
A little bit sooner than 10 years.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. Yeah, honestly, I'm not sure.
Let's have this conversation again in 10 months. How's that? We'll have better
Come
ideas
on,
of what's going to happen.
10 months, I don't know. We will see. I mean, open to every new things. What about copying from the good old James management config reactive approach to configurations and structure changes?
I've had a lot of conversations with James. James. He has a lot of opinions, and they are absolutely right. And you need to hear them. And so he's been very, very adamant in trying to convince us that MGMT is the way of the future. And I don't know that I know enough to like fully disagree with him. And so like I'm totally open to having those conversations going forward. The thing is that it's not really so much about the tool itself. Like the tool is good, Puppet's good. It's the ecosystem. Like the ecosystem is what actually matters. If you have this entire ecosystem that Puppet has with like what is there 6,800 7,000 modules on the Forge that let you manage pretty much everything out there. That's the ecosystem that actually matters. And once we get, I know that they have an abstraction layer so that they can somehow run Puppet code, but it's not as seamless as just using Puppet to run Puppet code. But I am still open to having those conversations.
Okay, we'll see also if there will be some kind of reactive Puppet. Ansible has followed that way as well. So, I mean, maybe it makes sense for some reason to find a way to integrate some kind of reactive
and we're definitely going to be talking about this in Ghent. So, I don't know. Keep posted. We'll do another one of these in a little bit, and we'll talk about like things that we've learned. Maybe we'll share some ideas.
Wonderful. So, do you want to add anything before maybe we close this wonderful discussion from my perspective?
I would very quickly add that Tim mentioned donations, and I think we've all been posting recently about how OpenVox can receive funding from the via Open Collective. It doesn't have to be a lot of money. You don't have to be a big organization putting thousands of pounds in. It can be a small donation that I make myself. So I would just kind of highlight that and encourage that because we've
very much so.
Every Puppet user I know of has got value from Vox tools and modules.
Yep. And when you do that, like you may be a small person, you may not be a big company or whatnot, but a lot of companies do matching. So if you go talk to your HR department, just say, hey, I want to contribute to this group that I find a lot of value from and is helping me in my career and is helping this company, there's a decent chance that they might just match you and double the contributions that you're making. So.
And one other thing
you can also give your time. We would love to have more people involved and more people helping with this. Sorry, go ahead, David.
No, I was just going to say, and at Config Management Camp, the highlight this year, we have 8 people from Perforce coming, including Charlie Sharpstein coming all the way from New York. And we're running kind of, there are 2
I'm excited to see
rooms.
Charlie again.
Me too. And there's two Puppet rooms filled with talks, both from Perforce employees and from the community. So, I think this is going to be a really special Config Management Camp for everyone.
Yeah.
Yes. So maybe one last sentence. Alessandro, you mentioned that you had the impression that Puppet lost a bit of ground and maybe declined over the past years. And some time ago, I had the same impression. And it was always nice to see how many talks we have at Config Management Camp. When I first attended 7-8 years ago, we had 2 days of Puppet rooms. And the past years, we just had 1 room for 1 day. And even last year, there wasn't a single talk from Perforce. And this year, we have all the time of Config Management Camp, there are Puppet talks, and sometimes even in 2 rooms in parallel. So I think the ecosystem is getting more momentum again. And I think with the partnership of Perforce and Puppet, we are trying to keep the momentum up and have a sustainable and healthy ecosystem. I think that's working good at the moment.
Yep. And honestly, I think a lot of people are excited by the idea of being able to get more involved and help with Puppet. The amount of traffic that we've seen to the Vox Pupuli website has just like skyrocketed over the last couple of months. So very excited by this.
That's wonderful. Okay, so let's see what the future will preserve for us. Thank you guys for everything. I think Perforce is lucky to have David as a person keeping the roots with the good old community. And I think that people like Tim and Ben are so important for the future of Puppet, all the work you are doing. So guys, let's see in Ghent, and all the best.
Thank you much. Thanks for having us, Alessandro.
Thanks.
I'm glad to have you in the community as well.
I'm here doing my tiny things.
Abnormal DevOps Iterations.